Why can't we ourselves into a better world?
Because the effect of it is the opposite of what we want in order to achieve a better world, that we need to build solidarity and help people to focus not on the moral character of individuals, but on creating better structures of society. And to the extent that we end up being very focused on, morally judging people and kind of excommunicating them for their perceived sins, we're doing the opposite of that.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, just to be provocative, I feel like a lot of the people who are, most like the people in the liberal sphere who are most critical of like the carceral state and how punitive it is are very quick to be cancelers in terms of just like people don't have the ability to rehabilitate themselves in the public eye at the very least. And I understand that, like, to an extent it's about powerful people, so there is that, but it is this emphasis on the individual that I think rubs you the wrong way and at least rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I'd also point out that that people being like having tweets be misinterpreted and go viral and having and possibly facing professional consequences for that is not only something that happens to powerful people. If you read like John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, a lot of his examples are of people who would be, nobody would have ever heard of if not for that. But even when we are talking about somewhat powerful people, which certainly comes in degrees, being the editor of Teen Vogue is not like being the Secretary of Defense. And in that instance, right, there was a recent incident where somebody who was hired as the editor is a woman in her late 20s, and 10 years before, she has, as a teenager, she had tweeted things that were trying too hard to be edgy and edging into mild racism, and she had apologized for them many times. But she was still, successfully, pressured to resign, or, in a corporate environment like Condé Nast, when you say you're doing that, right, whether that's a nice way of being fired or resigning is often unclear. And I do think that there is a kind of performative contradiction in the way that you're talking about, because presumably anybody who's a leftist, who works for them, which is quite a few people. I mean, weirdly enough, there's a lot of very left content at Teen Vogue these days, that presumably thinks that we're too carceral as a society, certainly supports, banning the box on employment applications, so that once you get out of prison, your criminal record won't be held against you. And it does sit very uncomfortably to, on the one hand, say, like, a rapist who gets out of prison should be allowed a second chance, and to have, and should be able to have a, productive career and everything like that. But that somebody who was guilty of bad tweets, 10 years ago, should not, right? I mean, like, I'm sure there are ways that you can make those two positions consistent, but I mean, at the very least, I think there is a little bit of tension there.
Okay, now I got to be honest. Like when Matt said that he was going on your show a couple of weeks ago, and we were all getting geared up. I think Matt thought it was going to be spicier than it turned out to be, and it was not. You guys didn't get as much an argument as that. Like, and then I was excited to get into an argument with you about it.
You were excited to give him an argument.
I was excited to give you an argument, but I think, like, let's be clear here, though, in terms of just even that analogy. The rapist has gone to prison, and presumably had some moments of accountability. Now, I mean, if we're talking about like, the severity of the accountability, but I have a real problem with this, with just even the concept that a cancel culture is like a new phenomena, and that's one of the problems I have with just the whole idea of this, so-called cancel culture. The other problem I have with it is like, why is it necessarily and I agree there are excesses involved in it, of course, without a doubt, like anything else for that matter. But why is it that that thing can't coexist with the type of politics that are a little bit more material based? And much more material based. I mean, look, the fact is, and I don't want to get too far afield because I'm presenting two different questions here, but the fact is that our whole society has been involved in a culture war at least since, I don't know. I mean, probably for the past 60 years, and since the 60s, and that culture war has taken on different issues at different times. But in 1993, Pat Buchanan is at the Republican convention talking about how disgusting it is that or maybe I guess it was Dan Quayle who was the vice president nominee at the time, like how disgusting it was that Murphy Brown was having a child out of wedlock. For those of you youngs, Murphy Brown's not a real person. Murphy Brown was a sitcom character. Okay, I mean, so this cancel culture has been going on, or at least like this cultural fight. The cancel part of it that has been going on is like, I don't know. Why didn't I get this job? Well, it's because you came in with your hair too long, or you came in and, you wrote about this somewhere. We're not going to tell you. We're not going to broadcast it. It's just that like the power has been democratized as to who gets to succeed in society and why.
Yeah. So there were two questions there, but first I'm very curious about which of Matt's appearances on the show this was and what he thought he was going to argue with me about. But going to have to get some clarification from that.
This was
that later.
This was your appearance on our show, Ben.
Sorry. It was your appearance on Left Reckoning. Sorry.
Left Reckoning. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Just like to keep track of that. Whether Matt should be allowed back in the show. So, yeah, I think. So I think on the newness, question. I think the issue is really what we're talking about. And I would actually also separate out two different things, which is one of them is the general phenomenon of, what's sometimes called cancel culture, or I feel like a slightly older and maybe more accurate term was call out culture, which is something that infects the entire political spectrum. And so that's one issue. And then the other issue is how it affects the left, which is what I care about as a leftist who wants the left to be more effective, which is the focus that article in Jacobin you're referring to. We can't cancel our way into a better world, and is of course the focus of the book. So on that first question, this sort of general cancel-y trends in the larger culture, and how new they are. I don't think it's a binary thing, right? Like either this is totally without precedent, or there's like nothing new or different, right? So I would argue that there are a lot of different factors that have come together to make it more of a problem in the last several years. So like, for example, the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the article about Jeopardy, where you had 450 former Jeopardy contestants who signed this open letter denouncing a current winner for making a gesture with his fingers to indicate that he won 3 times, which to them looked like something that it's, some people say is a white supremacist thing, although there's Snopes says it's usually, not, it's just a normal gesture that everybody makes. And I think that's something, maybe you disagree. I would have a very hard time imagining like hundreds of normie Jeopardy contestants, getting together on something like that in like the 1990s. But
I'm sorry. That to me seems like a technological issue, right? I mean, it's just like, I mean, because I know on the right they were doing that in the 90s. It's just that they were doing it through churches or through direct mailers. I mean, they were. There's no. I mean, all my examples are from like 2005. But like Lenny the Shark is teaching kids how to be trans. I mean, this was a real thing in whatever that kids movie was. I mean,
your examples are kind of on the of people on the right.
Yeah, no, they're on they were doing this on the right because they had the organizational structure to do it. They had churches. This was happening. It was. I mean, Jeopardy contestants probably wouldn't do it, but they would have no way of getting in touch with each other. Now,
so I do agree with you that part of the difference is technological, and I think that the technology makes a difference in a couple ways. One of them, sure, is just ease of communication, but another one is that I think that social media platforms are designed to be as addictive as at all possible. They're for-profit platforms. This is none of it, controversial, I think. And in particular, I think that the feedback loops that are built into them tend to reward our canceliest impulses. So an example I often think of is from last year, when Wendell Potter, who, for people who aren't familiar with him, is a former health insurance executive who had a come to Jesus moment about the issue, many years back, and has since devoted his life to fighting for single payer. And he tweeted something that was a very typical Wendell Potter tweet. It's like, oh, the fact that people don't realize how much Medicare for All would help us during the pandemic is really a sign of how much, how people believe the lies that I told when I was a health insurance executive. He's tweeted stuff like this nonstop for years. And somebody quote tweeted that, presumably having no idea who he was, and said, oh my God, this blanking piece of blank, blanking admitted it. And that had gotten 75,000 likes before enough people told him who Wendell Potter was that he took it down. And my point isn't that this particular person, who tweeted it should do better, although, it's that, why didn't he, right? Because he could have. It would have taken 3 seconds to click on Wendell Potter's name at the top of the tweet, see his Twitter bio, and see all the single payer stuff there. The reason he didn't, I think the feedback loop that's built into it, is you get that little endorphin rush of likes and retweets for throwing the first stone in something like this. And so it really rewards it. I think if you put that together with the fact that we live in a neoliberal hellscape where people are incredibly atomized, they often feel most connected to each other online. And you put that together with the fact that most Americans work in at-will workplaces, non-unionized. So doxing is a real, is like a very potent threat. I think that all of that stuff adds up to make this much more toxic and a much bigger problem, again, for everybody. I mean, I think that, you can trivially easily find examples all over the political spectrum of this happening. But what I'm concerned with, and maybe this takes us to your second question, the sort of, was it the meme question, why not both? I think that the problem from my perspective is that oftentimes the way that it plays out in the left is that we're way too quick to believe the worst possible interpretation of what each other do, that because the party line from so many people is, cancellation, smanchulation, nothing to see here. So we don't even see it as a problem when we do it. And I think that makes it, I think that creates a toxic atmosphere that's very unappealing to a lot of people that we might otherwise win over. And I think that makes it harder to build solidarity for those larger goals. I think it makes people more likely to burn out.
So why is this, I'm just like, a lot of this is based in social media critique, right? So, can you expand it to a larger critique of like culture? Does this exist outside of, Twitter or which is a huge part of it, I understand. And like, I think your point about the dopamine hits of likes mixed in with the dopamine hits of I'm better than, Louis C.K. or something like that. Like that is probably quite addictive to people. But outside of social media, is it cancel culture then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I do think part of the problem comes from the structure of social media itself, although that's also a big problem. I think it's way too easy to say, whatever, log off, don't worry about it, go for a run. But of course, in 2021, social media, the internet in general, is a huge part of where political education, political discussion, even political organizing takes place. We just finished a year where that was the only place that it could take place outside of rare exceptions. So I think that's a real problem, even to the extent that it is. I'm not convinced that it is solely confined to that, though, because I think that is, if you look, for example, at ways that spills over into real life with people getting fired and stuff. If you look at the way that, like the Barbara Ehrenreich example I give in the Jacobin piece, that you had like Time Magazine, sort of casually repeating, the sort of most harsh version of the accusation against her. I do think that's a problem in real life, and I want to just make one real quick point about this, which is that so far what we've mostly been talking about is this general cultural problem and how it might infect the left. But I think that there's also an element of this that is something that there's a problem. There's something else that's at play here, which is more specific to us, which is that for so long, any kind of option to the left of liberalism has been so far out into the wilderness in American political life that before basically 2015, that was like people like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn spent most of their lives as very marginal backbenchers. Anything more radical than that was completely off the table. And I think in that environment, it's very easy to start to think of left politics less as a serious project to change the world than as a kind of symbolic moral stand against the world that we're living in right now. And I think that can be bad in a lot of ways that I talk about in the book. But I think that one way is that it can lead people to get much more cancelly with each other on the left, because if all you're really doing is exhibiting your moral commitments, then it can be very easy to let that shade into spending all of your time interrogating whether everybody else is really sufficiently morally committed. I mean, I heard Sam Seder was an effing sellout. Like that we should like that. There is I think that there is a lot of that comes out of those sort of pathologies of powerlessness. And what I'm worried about is that when we're suffering from that already on the left, and also there are these sort of general trends because of technological change, because I would argue neoliberalism, that it adds up to a really toxic cocktail that I think even in petty examples, like people yelling at each other at the DSA convention because one of them says, hey guys, don't make loud noises, because some people might have noise sensitivity, and somebody else says, oh my God, he just said, hey guys, that's gendered language, don't do that. That's not something that I think makes us look like a club that most people want to join. And I'm concerned about that because I want everybody to join the club because I want us to win.
I want to just put a pin in that second part because I really do think that is actually the sort of the most fertile and interesting ground. And I think we're the first part about the Wendell Potter thing. That to me is like, to call that cancel culture, that the problem there is cancel culture, I think is it is the term becomes really unhelpful because, like, for instance, when Mike Cernovich essentially created a firestorm about a tweet that I had 9 years earlier, that was in response to, I think most people know this story, but it was in response to a Roman Polanski. There were people, and I was more associated with the entertainment industry at that time, just in terms I had more relationships. Friends I knew had signed a petition by 100 directors to essentially allow a Roman Polanski come back in the country and get like a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Oscars or something, despite the fact that he had been out of the country on the lam, as it were, for the rape of a 13-year-old girl. And I wrote it at the time, a satirical tweet that was to the effect, I don't quote it, but I think it's probably pretty close. Like, I don't care about Polanski. I just hope that if my daughter is ever raped, it is by an older man with a great sense of mise en scène. And Mike Cernovich paid Jack Prosobiec to dig through my tweets. They searched the term rape. That's all they could find. They put that out there. It was retweeted by Donald Trump Jr. and Seb Gorka, and it got me essentially fired from MSNBC for a couple of days. But the bottom line is, like, That to me was not cancel culture. That was some guy weaponizing what public doing what is this era's version of a public smear campaign. And when you tell me the Wendell Potter story, that's an idiot. That person who did that with Wendell Potter is an idiot. I mean, Wendell's been a guest on this show for, I don't know, 12 years. And, that's just somebody who doesn't know what they're taught. They're just an idiot. And yes, it hurt Potter in that moment. 75,000 people repeat this. But to say that that's cancel culture, and that's the same thing as saying that, like, I don't know, somebody who is, that Charlie Rose, let's say, what happened to Charlie Rose, to say that those two things are part of the same phenomena, the essence of the phenomena is the same for those two, just seems wrong to me. Like, one is using a mechanism to hold someone to account, but it's fraudulent. It's a fraudulent interpretation that you're holding them to. The other is using a mechanism to hold another person to account who has not had to deal with any type of accountability and has been fortunate enough to live in a society where they have more latitude. I mean, and I think that, like, I can come up with examples of people who I think were unfairly canceled. Like, I think, frankly, Matt Taibbi, what other issues that people may have with him, but I said at the time, and I still believe, like, there were no accusers. There were no accusers for Matt Taibbi. He didn't have any. And yet it destroyed the rollout of his book. And I thought that was, wildly unfair. But I think that was like, there was people who were disingenuously doing things. But I think there's other people who do stuff who, like, lose their audience, or at least a big part of their general audience, that I think is like, you know what? That's okay. That's fair. And I think there's also a quality of this, like, maybe sometimes it goes too far, but if you're talking about changing, I mean, I can tell you when stuff went down during that time with Louis and other people, I would talk to managers out there who were, and lawyers and guys, and there were a lot of people who were afraid. And I was like, maybe you've been inappropriate. I mean, like, if it changes their behavior, I don't think that's a bad thing, actually. And which is not to say that I think everything that happened with Louis was fair. Yeah. But some of it I do. And I'm and I consider myself very sympathetic to Louis' position. I've disclosed in the past, I spoke to Louis after the fact. And, I think there are some things in the reporting that was unfair, and that, but I also think there was, like, there's a debt that builds up, right? That if you don't address certain things, and there's a debt that builds up. And I think, like, that's I think that's a dynamic that happens across the board. I just think that, like, that phenomena of accountability is not new. What's new about it is two things. One, technology and a methodology that can be abused. And two, that it provides that methodology and technology provides power to a different set of people in society that it doesn't equalize things, but it certainly changes the dynamic.
Yeah. So what I'd say about all of that is that I think what I would think of as cancel culture or call out culture or whatever you want to call it. I'm not really that concerned about fighting about words, but with whatever sort of phenomenon is under discussion, is a bunch of trends that we talked about earlier that I think converge in hair trigger, mass denunciations, and oftentimes an atmosphere of sort of mutual surveillance, right? We're going to see if we've got anything, that we can hold against you. And of course, the fact that hair trigger denunciation is bad doesn't mean that nobody ever deserves to be denounced or to lose their job. I mean, if you're sexually harassing people, whatever, like there certainly are cases where that's appropriate. But one, I think that this stuff is incredibly capricious in terms of who is taken down and who is not. There's no sort of principle there in ways that would actually be most helpful to people who might be victims of things that actually do deserve to be protected from. And two, I don't think the fact that Cernovich was trying to smear you, or the fact that the person who tweeted the thing about Wendell Potter was an idiot, I don't think that either of those negate the larger problem. In other words, that the question to my mind is, how is it that this many people are this ready to jump on a bandwagon like that? Which is what can lead it to be abused by bad faith actors, or just sort of, stumbled into unintentional abuse, by idiots, because bad faith actors and idiots are always going to exist. I mean, that's inevitable. The sort of question is, I realize this gets us into the question of solutions, which is the hardest part of it. I mean, I've got some thoughts, but the question is whether we want to live in a world where it's just that easy, right? And in particular, coming back to the question of the left, and sort of instances of left on left, cancellation with Barbara Ehrenreich or Natalie Wynn or other things like that. Whether having a movement where we don't even sort of see this stuff as a problem is helpful for sort of building solidarity and getting people to focus on that kind of more material politics.
Yeah, I want to let me just say one more piece to that, and then I want to turn to that other part about you said, like the sort of the inter-left sort of assessments. I mean, I think that, like, my sense of this, and it may be wrong, is that there was. My daughter was part of a generation, I think the first generation, that had over 50% saturation with phones at a certain age or something. And I think when I'm convinced this is a technology issue more than anything else, because that's the only way that, social media is the way that people get famous for doing this. I mean, I remember that woman, she has since left the sphere. I cannot remember her name, but she is the one who wanted to cancel Colbert. I don't know if people remember that from way back. I mean, this is even pre-Emma's time, but this is before people even referred to it as cancel culture. But literally the hashtag, I think, was cancel Colbert, because Colbert had done, I think, I can't remember what it was. It was a joke that was perceived. I don't even want to say what it was because I honestly can't remember. But and so I really do think this is a technology issue, and I think that, like, there was a
Brendan saying the joke.
I don't think that's correct. I don't want to say what it is because I'm not convinced about that. Okay. But there was a time where it was like, I was really, really careful to make sure that my daughter, it was like, to explain to her, like, you can't send pictures to guys like that are inappropriate, that you think are going to be protected, let's say. This wasn't an issue, but I wanted to make her understand this dynamic, because if you put stuff into digital now, it's a totally different world. Like, this is going to exist for decades somewhere, and you're going to give people the opportunity to, and I think society had to make a big change, right? Like, I mean, there's stuff that I did in college or in high school or in junior high that I mean, I'm not thinking of anything specific, but I am really glad is not living online forever. And, there was, the idea of, like, whatever, people plagiarize or whatever it is, or they get kicked out of a dorm or whatever it is. And, like, or, some kid got kicked out of the school they were in, or that's a big advantage that my generation had, is that, like, you had an opportunity. Your past was disposable in many respects. Like, it didn't have durability more often than not, unless it became a newspaper story and it was on microfiche. But it is that doesn't exist today. And there's going to have to be, there's going to be, it's for better and for worse. There's going to have to be an adjustment to what you do, and there's certain things you can't trust. Privacy has a different definition now, and I think just as people are adjusting to that reality, they also have to adjust to the reality of like the way that what we're calling call out culture, cancel culture operates. And I'm convinced in 5 or 10 years, you know, the Wendell Potter of his time can get 72,000 likes, and people are just going to be like, that has no relevance. Like we've already figured out we've already developed the antibodies for that type of thing. There's some other, you know, as a society, we no longer hold the faith in what one person tweets in the same way. I think to a certain extent, it's already happened on some level, right? And you know, and that may mean less accountability for some people, frankly. Like, I don't know, like, would Chris Cuomo survive at a slightly different era to find out that the guy's been, you know, helping his brother message? I mean, you shouldn't do that as a host of CNN, right? I mean, when you have him on as a guest, that's not, you know, but I think like CNN's inoculated on some level.
Well, I mean, my understanding is that everything that's bad that the Cuomo brothers ever did is just Italian culture. So that's yeah.
Discrimination.
But
exactly. It's the Sopranos. It's like anti-Italian discrimination.